People who help fight human trafficking, what are some tips you have for spotting illegal activity and reporting it? Now let's read some comments. I'm an intern at a human trafficking task force. It really helps just knowing the basics, because I had no idea everything it entails. There is sex trafficking, the one we all know the most about, labor trafficking, and organ trafficking. Trafficking happens through force, fraud, and or coercion. Trafficking is something of value that is being exchanged. The something of value can be food, shelter, clothes, money. You get the gist. There is also the age issue. Anyone under the age of 18 that has sex in exchange for a good is automatically considered a human trafficking victim. Even if the legal age of consent is 16, a 16-year-old cannot consent to commercial sex. It also does not matter if they say they're 18 and have fake identification proving they're 18. If you are caught paying someone that is legally 16 for sex, you are human trafficking. My organization is holding a webinar on this soon, and we also have social media where we explain the issues. If you guys want to PM me, I'll share our socials. Visualization helps us fight height, and so do donations if you can. We are a non-profit. Thank you for reading. I worked on countering human trafficking for the municipality of our capital, EU country. Here to add that in addition to the types mentioned above, there is also the type of trafficking for forced criminal activities. Think of children being forced to steal or con, not rarely by family members, or people being forced to cut or house. I worked as front desk for a hotel, had a couple of experiences with this. Look for groups of 2 to 3 where one person does all of the talking, specifically when the other or others look scared, are overly covered, cringe when the talker is speaking, or look under the influence of something. Ensure you get ID from all parties. When you suspect something is going on, note down their room number and names given. Trust your gut. What we call a gut feeling is a combination of millions of tiny factors you might not knowingly be aware of. Tiny details like hitched breathing, micro expressions, specific lying tells, environmental factors, etc. These will add up and let your subconscious mind make connections that your general mind might not. Trust that feeling. If you suspect something is wrong, and contact the police to inform them of a suspected human trafficking issue. Both times my gut told me to call it and I ended up regrettably being correct. These specific details are great, thank you. I'm shook. I saw an odd group of 3 at an airport once, come back from Jamaica. One was small, timid, fragile and looked vastly different than the other 2 who were rugged and were talking to each other constantly. The timid one just tagged along and never looked at them or talked to them. I should have reported them. A border security even stopped my fiancé and I and asked us a bunch of questions. One being if we saw anyone suspicious. My gut was telling me that trio did not look right, and according to the points you made, the 2 were trafficking the young girl duck. Just here to add that, when IDing all parties, it's worth to start paying closer attention when a person doesn't produce their own ID but someone else has this. In human trafficking instances, the trafficker holds the victim's ID, making it more difficult for them to escape or seek help. This combined with the person holding the IDs doing all the talking, even when you specifically ask the other party a question, should arouse attention. Hotel receptions but also government front desk workers, where people have to register themselves etc., can be very important in spotting human trafficking. I worked at a hotel as well, but as room service in the US. I think there's a belief that it only happens in seedy motels and shady areas. IDK any statistics, but the hotel I worked at was a very upscale business hotel and there were still a few cases in the past. They were just better at covering it up. Couple things I was told to look out for were multiple different people all going into the same hotel room at different times, and if they ordered food but had me put the tray on the floor outside and wouldn't let me in. Standard routine was, they let me in, I set the tray on the desk and have them sign the receipt, I leave. Obviously some people just want privacy, but I'd at least let front desk know and check with housekeeping to see if they could get in depending on the time. Cause who knows, maybe my coworkers noticed something off. I've told this story on here before. I don't fight human trafficking, but I'm a teacher who had a student who was sold by his mother in exchange for drugs. He was kept as a sex slave from ages 3 to 11 when the FBI uncovered a sex ring and found him. He had never been to school. He had never even been out of the house. These sorts of crimes are not being committed out in the open. They are very well hidden. You will never see these children, and no one is missing them. This poor boy couldn't read or write. One day, he got a 100% on his spelling test. He asked me if I could call his mom and ask her to take him back, and he'd be a good boy from now on. Child sex trafficking is unfortunately all too common, but it's become a very hidden problem. This is heartbreaking. This is heartbreaking. My therapist once told me the story of a young boy whose mother poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. He was put in a coma for healing, and when he was brought out of the coma, he was screaming for his mommy. This story allowed me to forgive myself, or at least understand why I loved my horribly abusive mother. Honor thy mother and father should also include honor thy child. As a father myself to a beautiful 4-year-old boy who is my entire world, I couldn't ducking imagine. The worst part is that he said he would be good. Dude, I ducking can't. Like, how can anyone do this? Children are innocent, full of hope, full of life, and it's fucking soul crushing to see things like this. Edit. Thanks for my first gold, stranger. My highest awarded post is me sharing my heartbreak for a little boy I don't even know. Kiss your kids goodnight and tell them you love them. We're all they've got. Jesus ducking Christ. I have a newborn boy, and reading this both enraged me and broke my heart. I wish I could give this kid a hug and a loving home. How is he doing now? Is his abuser in prison? I'm not calling that woman the M word. She doesn't ducking deserve it. Damn, this made me tear up while my blood is boiling. That is unbelievably ducked up. This one broke me. Man, that must have been tough. We all have those moments in the profession that haunt us. What did you say when he asked you to call his mum? Even just reading that made my heart break and eyes tear up. Imagine going through all that trauma and thinking it was your fault. That poor kid. One of the very first cases I worked on was 3 young children, under 6. They came in because their mother abandoned them at a homeless shelter. Best thing she ever did for them. They later disclosed they were part of a sex trafficking ring involving multiple children in a trailer park and were being sold by their mom to other adults, forced to perform acts with other kids, and for child P. We called the police. They said there was nothing they could do. In Latin America, look for maids who have been with a family since they were children. In my country they are called criadas. This is form of servitude that closely resembles slavery and begins with a child, usually female, of a poor rural family being brought to live with a moderately wealthy urban family. The promise of a better future than what the parents could provide. These kids don't attend school and perform house chores all day and are paid in food and living quarters and sometimes the promise of money that the bosses are holding for them. They grow up this way, so when they are adults they are afraid to leave. They don't know any other way of life. The bosses don't often acknowledge anything wrong, and they claim that the crier is grateful for having been given a better life. I sadly have to admit that this happened in my extended family. They were bosses to a crier who would be 75 years old today. Only after all my aunts died and my cousins inherited the crier, they acknowledged the wrongdoing and arranged for her to have a pension and a house and never have to work again and be treated a respected member of the family. But it was too late. She only lived as a retired person for 5 years before dying. She never learned to read. She never had children or a husband or any type or significant other. In Texas, something similar happened to my great-grandmother when she was around 10. This can happen anywhere, and children are particularly vulnerable. Her father traded her for some farm animals in the 1910s. So she went to live with this middle-aged married couple. She was supposed to be their servant in exchange for food and board. She had her first child fathered by the husband when she was 11. It didn't survive. The second one did. After my grandma told me about all this and more, I suddenly understood my great-grandmother better, her personality and her actions. And I had always wondered why she wasn't much older than her oldest children. And then I knew why. If I remember correctly, she died in the late 90s/early 2000s. She was a complicated woman. Edit. I'm not sure if this will make anyone feel any better, but stick with me. From what I understand, she ended up getting married to a man when she was around 18 or 20 or so to escape that situation. He was also very old and abusive. She went through a series of super old and abusive men. And I'm not pointing fingers, and neither is my grandma, but they all died from stuff like heart attacks early on. Maybe because they were old? It's a bit of a weird coincidence. Keep in mind, my great grandmother was hardworking, but she was never allowed to go to school or do anything to invest in her own future. She was stuck in below minimum wage jobs with a whole lot of kids to feed and clothe. I can't say her life was ever easy or fair. She was a hard woman and hard to like. And I personally always thought that she seemed unhappy. I don't blame her on that score. But we loved her. She lived to be in her 90s in an assisted living facility, and at the very least, she had children and grandchildren who loved her. That doesn't just happen in Latin or South America. There was an article not long ago from a man in Seattle. His family had immigrated from the Philippines when he was a child. They brought their live-in maid with them. He didn't realize, until he became a doctor or professor, don't remember which, that she was essentially his family's slave. My mom was looking for a part-time live-in housekeeper when I was in Kinda, US. A friend from church said that she knew a relative who could help. My mom was expecting to meet a grown woman who would help raise me and take care of the house while my mom was at work, someone who would be employed for a fair wage. It turns out this person was actually a 16-year-old girl. Obviously my mom jumped at the opportunity to hire her, and we took her in. Enrolled in school, made sure she got by well in her classes, and she helped my mom with the house, and with me part-time, being paid a full-time wage. We made it very clear that, if she did not want to work, she would still be supplied with a place to live, food to eat, and a school to go to. She actually sent the majority of her wages back home to her family in a ranch in Mexico. She then graduated, later got married, and now has 2 beautiful girls. My mom told me, when I was grown, that she was daunted by the responsibility of essentially adopting a teenager, but did it because my mom was afraid of what might happen to her or what family she might end up with if my mom did not take her in. We had a case like that hit the news the other day. The girl was a slave for 40 years, and when she was in her 20s she was forcefully married with someone in the family so they could keep receiving his military pension after his death. Fortunately, she was rescued and managed to keep receiving the money, cause she was legally married with a guy. Wow. That is very sad. Thank you for sharing about this. Labor trafficking is just as big of an issue as sex trafficking. In Bangladesh we have a similar thing called Tanaya, as in her name is usually Tanaya. The wealthier family adopts her from a poorer family, but she doesn't get to play nor go to school like the family's children. She does chores. She gets fed and clothed, but the money goes to her parents. It's a vicious cycle in Bangladeshi society because Tanayas get abused and berated. With the lack of education they tend to make bad decisions when they hit puberty. Sometimes they run away around the ages of 15 to 18 with the first boy nearby that shows them attention. These relationships don't end up well because she's to being sold or end up being abused by the boy/man. Some Tanayas even go as far as turning to black magic and cursing the families when they grow up. Black magic because these wealthy families pride in themselves being Muslim. And then the stereotype just continues in society that orphaned girls are inherently bad, and that's why they do stuff like turning to black magic. My grandmother here in the US once joked about getting a Tanaya when she moved into a big house. It really disgusted me. So that's one way to feel suspicious. Adoption by a family in which their home country's culture looks down on orphans. Because usually it means you're getting a Cinderella situation. I sadly have to admit that this happened in my extended family. A variation of this happened to my grandmother. We are Hispanic. She was the darkest of the 3 girls, so my great grandmother pulled her out of school to help keep the home for the whiter siblings who would, ostensibly, go on to have more success. As it happens, it's true. The others did find success, but we don't know much about them. But their tracks for careers are much different than this side of the family. There is a happy ending though. My grandmother didn't learn how to read, but she sure knew how to keep numbers. She went on to keep, and fully run, a successful farm. My grandmother was well off after running the farm, and ensured that my mother was able to get a great education and save our immediate family's branch from falling into the trappings that her older siblings could not/would not avoid. part of it makes me angry, but my grandmother got her bag and nobody took her for a fool after her childhood. She really came into her own. It makes me sad to think that this is largely still a thing. Thank you for sharing. This same thing also happens in Asia too, down to the T. I read a very powerful piece about this. This is how it is in Bangladesh as well. My maternal side of the family is extremely wealthy, and they have a few housemaids or chaka, which is the only term to describe housemaids, and it's also derogatory. Some of these housemaids have been with the families since they were very young. One of the housemaids married their chauffeur and they live in one of the outhouses, both serving their employers. Additionally, this plays a huge role in the environment in which kids grow up in. My maternal aunt didn't learn to tie her shoes until she was 16. She had a personal housemaid that did everything for her until she got married and moved away. From what I've heard, she did not adjust to the move for a long time. I no longer associate myself with my family for many other reasons. Here in Spain we get a lot of women from Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. Some pay for their trip to Europe this way, some are blackmailed, and some are lured offers of jobs like cleaning, or low-level administrative jobs, secretaries, paper pushing, and end up in a roadside brothel. If you're a young woman in a poor area of Eastern Europe and you get an offer for a easy job in Germany, France, Spain or the Netherlands, be very suspicious. I was working in China teaching English. One of my fellow teachers was blonde and good looking. One day she told me excitedly she had an offer to marry a Russian man. He was going to pay her $30,000 to marry him. All she had to do was travel to Russia to meet him. We were in Kikaya, about 2000 from Russia. I managed to talk her out of it. I think I may have saved her life. Exactly. In the East, there have been public service adverts, billboards, posters, TV, etc. about this for at least 25 years. I'd say most people know, but the problem is sometimes people get so desperate, might have kids to feed, etc. They trick themselves into ignoring the warning signs. Well, this German nightclub job seems legit, or convince themselves it won't happen to them. I'd add, if you did go, just never give anyone your passport. If they need a photocopy, you can make it yourself. Also, men are not immune. Men are more often trafficked for labor, like construction work, but it's still very bad. Yeesh, that's really sad. Good advice. Hopefully it helps someone out there. I don't think people realize how common this is. Not just in Spain, not just for women from Eastern Europe and Africa. It happens constantly in Canada, to Canadian citizens. If you're a woman in Canada and you get some job offer in the travel industry, or for some resort, even if it's local, that you never applied to, stay clear. Stay very clear. As an Eastern European 19-year-old who's looking for low-level jobs abroad, back in 2012 at the time, 29F, spent a year in Spain, basically got a 15-day trip for my birthday, and ended up not going back for a year. I met a friend online, and rented an apartment with her. We had to part ways due to her having to move for work. I ended up getting residency for 5 years, and started job hunting. In the process of trying to find a job I realized Spain was not in good shape. Some sort of crisis was going on and a lot of people were in a paro, which means like being on unemployment. Anyways, I went to a lot of interviews, from retail, call center, secretary, assistant, even cleaning jobs. I applied for whatever, because I really wanted to stay in Spain. I loved it there. Anyways, sorry for the long intro, going to the point now. I applied for these jobs online and most of them were disguised as a legit job, but it was I went to a store and met with the owner. It was going like a normal interview. He asked about my experience. He spoke about the store, how things were done and what they expected. I thought the interview was going really well, and he told me, after about 45 minutes into the interview, that the only thing I needed to agree on for the job, that he didn't mention, was that I was to watch him, and sometimes others masturbate in front of me. He kept insisting it wasn't a Saxhole job, that I wouldn't be touched, and I just had to watch. This dude was like 60. I noped out of there as fast as I could. Others like cleaning positions asked me if I would clean naked for extra cash. Some asked how my financial situation was and even offered free lodging and money to help me that I just needed to allow them to do all things to me. It felt so easy to get stuck in a trafficking situation, if you agree. I'm educated and graduated from university. I knew better. Can't imagine younger girls in difficult situations agreeing to that. Sorry for typers, English is second language. We get types like these in American strip clubs too. Most are not performing extras / soliciting sarks, but are forced to work excessive hours and cohabitate and give a large cut of their profits to their. I feel for some of them, but I'm not sure how to help without compromising my own safety. Legal types of sarks work in the US are still criminalized, and law enforcement is often not on our side. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos. Also like the video if you enjoy it.